Hello and welcome back to my channel. Hi, if you're new, my name is Emma and this is every book that I read in 2024. Is this video a little bit late? Okay, maybe, but you know what, mind your business, it's here now. You know what, actually, I think it's a bigger stack than I thought it was. I read 10 books in 2024. Every time I've sort of told myself, oh, I only read 10 books, then I do reconsult the stack and I'm like, you know what? That's not that bad. I think I read just shy of 20 the year before, but they were all really thin books, so no wonder I read so many then. This time I have gone ahead and included 3 that are about 600 pages plus, so I'm dyslexic, that's why this matters to me. I think this was a valiant effort in a year that I felt like I didn't read like at all. I really don't think I've read very much at all last year. I've already read 3 books so far in 2025, so it's already, I'm doing a lot better than I was last year. I don't know, last year I think at one point I kind of gave up. There are like full-on months where I just did not read a single thing, but I think what really sort of pulled me out of my like not reading was fantasy, which is great. For example, in between these 3 books that I read and then this is a space of in between. There's 3 months I didn't read, maybe even 4 actually, but then fantasy really got me back into it and I just slammed out a few and that was really great. Of this stack, I told myself that I wanted to spend all year reading classics and then that made me not want to read any books. So then I decided to just relax, and then I think fantasy has got me way back into reading. I'm currently reading a fantasy book at the moment, Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb, part of her Farseer trilogy. That has got me so hooked and kind of a little bit obsessed with reading again, which has been really lovely. But yes, for this video I will just talk you through the books that I read in 2024. I'm going to do so in the order in which I read them. You can consider this my top 10 books that I read in 2024 because I only read 10. Some of these were excellent and some of these were just... That's why book reviews and things are important, because not everything lives up to the hype, unfortunately. I read Ottessa Moshfegh's Eileen. I really wanted to like this. I absolutely loved My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I think that novel is absolutely fantastic. This predates that one and I just really didn't care for this. I thought that this would be significantly better. This is a novel about a woman called Eileen Dunlop. She works at a boys' prison. Her father is an alcoholic. She sort of is ambling through life and then the novel takes a turn when she meets this stunning woman who also has started to work at the prison as I think she's a psychologist if I remember correctly. The main flaw with this is that it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds and it doesn't really go anywhere.
Hello, editing, I'm interjecting here. I think a better way of explaining is it not that it builds and builds and builds but doesn't go anywhere. It's more that you have 150 pages, almost 200 pages, not really anything. It's very just like slow and not really very much is happening. And then it essentially feels like the entirety of the plot kicks off in the last 50 pages and then it's over. It's as if it took forever to get going and once it got going it just kind of went The pacing in this book is just absolutely whack. So that's really my main thing. I was bored for ages and then thrilled for 5 seconds. That was my reading experience.
Actually, to be fair, I actually don't think I remember how this ends. It's set around Christmas, so it's a Christmas novel if you enjoy bleakness and destitute sort of with your side of Christmas cheer. There's a lot about this that had me going, yikes, and just ugh, because some of the boys who are in this facility, in this boys' prison, are there for really terrible reasons. There's a lot about sort of the nitty gritty of society. There's a lot of just terrible things in this book, but I think it almost relies a bit too much on them instead of on the plot itself. And I don't think Eileen as a character is necessarily very developed. I think a lot of her is sort of saying the thing we shouldn't say or doing the thing we shouldn't do, and then it's quite fun to obviously live vicariously through characters who are terrible people, considering the fact that most of us, I would hope, are striving not to be said terrible people. But this ultimately just left me underwhelmed and feeling very disappointed, especially because it was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize, and I read those kind of labels on books, that they draw me in, you know. It was disappointing, but I can understand how this set the stage for her to write My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which I thought was much, much better. One thing I did notice about Eileen as a character, and then the unnamed protagonist of My Year of Rest and Relaxation, is that they're both a bit gross and quite disgusting. So kind of a thematic kind of world, I think, that kind of this shares. A Certain Hunger by Chelsea G. Summers. But this, if you're reading around Moshfegh and you enjoy her work, I don't think this one is very good, I'm afraid. Moving on, this is one of the 2 classics that I actually read this year. The 2 big classics, I think. I could argue that I read 3, but this is one of the big ones. I read Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. With classics, it's one of those that I always feel like I really should have read. Especially because I grew up in North Yorkshire. I have been to Haworth a couple times. I know what the area around Haworth looks like, which is where the Brontë sisters lived. I'm pretty sure I've been to their house. I think I went as a child. It's a museum, you can go visit it. So I know this landscape of the moors very well. You know, that's where I spent so many childhood walks, getting absolutely drenched and cold and miserable. I know this kind of landscape very well, so it's something that I was excited to read in print, and from this sort of 19th century perspective, especially having now moved out of there and my parents sold our childhood home, so I kind of wanted, you know, I wanted to revisit, and this is what I chose. I actually weirdly also did that with Eliza Clark's Penance, but I think I mentioned that I've read quite recently. That's set in a coastal North Yorkshire town, sort of like a fictional version of Scarborough and Whitby. I'm glad that I chose to read it much older than my mum wanted me to read it as a teenager, and I never really wanted to, and I'm glad I read it in my 20s, because the thing with classics sometimes, right, is because you think you've almost read them by osmosis because people speak so often of them, you see so many references and you see all these films and things, you think you know the story. I did not know the story. I was like, I will know this, I'm like, it'll feel really familiar. Wuthering Heights is actually batshit insane. My light's changed, my light has changed. This light is an automatic light bulb. They're really fun, the Wi-Fi ones, but my mum just sent me a really aggressive text message. And by that, it's just a single emoji with an exclamation mark. Okay, fine. We're gonna go warm and cozy again. Yeah, this book is kind of insane. It feels teenagery. Almost. That is not something that I expected. How old was Emily Brontë when she wrote that? Oh my god, I think she was my age when she died, right? She was 30 when she died. That's terrible. That's interesting. Yeah, so she was 27 when she wrote Wuthering Heights. I'm 26. I think that's quite fun. I do like that I chose to read this later than reading it as a teenager. I think it would have been more lost on me. But yeah, the characters are insane. And why are they all called Catherine? Why do they all have the same names? It's so irritating that they all have the same names. They're all called Linton or Heathcliff or Catherine. It's so incredibly confusing. Is it incestuous? Is it not incestuous? Penguin Classics has a family tree right at the beginning, which you will need because it doesn't, like, what is going on here? This book is just, what the fuck?
Hello, yes, I've come to interject again. If you haven't read Wuthering Heights is the novel by Emily Brontë. She's one of the Brontë sisters. You also have Anne and Charlotte. The novel is set on the West Yorkshire moors near Haworth. I think I already said that. So it's 2 families. One live in Longcross Grange and the others live in Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is the name of the house. That's what I took a long time to understand. It's the name of the house. And it's essentially sort of the relationships between multiple generations of these households. And yeah, it is incestuous. It's a bit but also this idea that so Heathcliff and Catherine are raised as siblings. This is something that would have also been weird for the Victorians reading this book. It's always so important with classics to like understand and look at and keep in mind the socio-historical context. I think that's one of the reasons for a long time I didn't want to. Like, this book is a lot about domestic abuse and emotional abuse and treatment of children and stuff, bad treatment of children. Poor Hareton was squalling and kicking in his father's arms with all his might, and redoubled his yells when he carried him upstairs and lifted him over the banister. I cried out that he would frighten the child into fits, and ran to rescue him. That is a big point of the book. I think when I was younger, I would have interpreted it as like, oh, that's kind of what makes this book crazy and whatever. But it's also, the Victorian readings would have understood that. So it's an important context to see that. But that's the point of her book. Which also is what gives it, its status as a classic, because it means that you see these relationships between all these people and it underscores these wider things about Victorian England, and especially the North, and family and class, and all of these kind of domestic relationships, and how women get treated, how inheritances work or don't work in favours. So this is, it's one of the things that gives it its status as a classic, because there's so much to unpack and go through. If I may quickly quote Calvino to you from his essay Why Read the Classics, his definition number 6 is: a classic is a book which has never exhausted all it has to say to its readers. This dense, multi-layered thing, and so much that you can extrapolate from Wuthering Heights, is one of the things that gives it its status as a classic. It's one of the things that even if you don't necessarily like the novel, I don't know if I necessarily liked it, but it's the kind of thing that you can have respect for it and understand why it's a classic, because of the absolute the amount of depth and scope there is to it. So I think it's really worth reading, but it is not what you think it is, especially considering in mind Emerald Fennell is doing a new adaptation of Wuthering Heights, which I first of all don't think is necessary, but second of all, she is out of her mind casting Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi. Absolutely out of her mind. There's also this running discourse that Heathcliff is meant to be like brown and black. I understand that he's meant to be gypsy, and Mr. Earnshaw picks him up on a business trip back from Liverpool. So people were getting very upset that they didn't cast an Indian or brown actor. I mean, it's never explicitly said in the books. Really, a lot of this sort of discourse comes from this bit right here. He is a dark-skinned gypsy in aspect, in dress and manners a gentleman. I know that there are other references made to him having dark features, such as dark hair, dark eyes, but his race is never sort of specifically discussed. So I think this ambiguity is where this all comes from. If anybody knows this better than me, please do say, because I find this very interesting. But he's definitely not white though. So I don't know what that casting is thinking. It's also, I think with this novel, I say that a lot of it is very dramatic and a lot of it is batshit crazy. That is also just something that happens when you read the Romantics and the Gothic. A lot of the stuff Victorians just write is really just it's a lot, it's morbid and just weird and just kind of what? But that's why it's important to read a lot of things, because then you see these things pop up in other places. Read Wuthering Heights and then also read Frankenstein. I don't know how to explain it, but I kind of feel they pair quite well. I do really want to read Jane Eyre though. That's still top of list. If you have read one, you have to read the other one, right? The impression I always get is that Wuthering Heights is it's a slightly more insane, crazy younger sister, and then Charlotte Brontë with Jane Eyre is just a bit more older, less crazy, but no less interesting or sophisticated. So those are obviously just my impressions because I haven't read that one. So we shall see. I must read about the Mad Woman in the Attic. We'll get there.
With classics, because they end up their reputations sort of precede themselves so greatly that you kind of assume, it's going to be a bit boring and la la. Somebody chucks a knife at someone at one point, no spoilers for a book that's 200 years old, but there are points in this book where, forgive me, the plot is plotting. I will say there are points in this book which is quite slow, and that's quite difficult sometimes, but it's a strange mixture of pace and as well the narrative structure. The narrative structure of this is retelling. The real, I guess, what I joked is the true protagonist of the novel is Ellen Dean. There is, what's his name? There's a man who comes to rent the house and then she tells him the story of the previous owners of the house. Yes, Mr. Lockwood, the new tenant. The notes I've written in this were, who is the main character? That is an excellent question. Nobody knows. Came for the classic, stayed for Nellie and Isabella being absolute banter. One of my other notes was, so incest? Another excellent note from me was, Linton is such a little incel shithead. What a vile, slimy bloke. Kind of like Edward from Narnia. Interesting. My main misconceptions about this was I was expecting it to be a longer story about Catherine. There are 2 of them, so that was very confusing. And this often gets recommended, I think, as a tragic love story, but it's not, it's unhinged. I don't understand why people seem to be like, oh, you know, I know what it is. It's like one quote that's like, oh, whatever him and my souls are made of, it's the same. I think people take that quote and then don't read the rest of the book. It's kind of like, if you look at British £10 notes, it's Jane Austen, there's like a quote from something she wrote, which is like, oh, how I do love reading, but it's taken from a character who says it really like, you know, satirically, because like they don't read whatsoever. I just find it so strange when people take these quotes and just completely disregard absolutely any and all context, and it completely changes the meaning of it. You know, that feeling of, you know, our souls, it shares the same. It feels very, you know, teenagers being crazy and ridiculous and a pain in the arse, because none of this is reasonable and most of it feels like it really should be quite illegal. It's also just an interesting one in terms of like how women are treated in, you know, domestic spaces in the 19th century, especially isolated ones, and then you can talk about class, and I think it's just, it's definitely an interesting one. I'm glad I read it, but also, what the fuck? I also have to say I really don't understand the romanticisation of Heathcliff. Like, I don't know if I missed anything, but did anybody else read the bits where he's, you know, a massive twat? I'm glad I read it, because I think the way we're told what happens in this book is really different from what is actually happening in this book. I definitely think it is worth reading. I think sometimes it's tricky and it's a bit of a struggle, but yeah, that's how I'm glad I read it now, but I'm never gonna reread this. And I definitely feel like people miss the point. Or maybe I completely miss the point, but I definitely feel like people romanticize that in ways that I don't think you're supposed to. Anyway, next then I read Patricia Highsmith, Talented Mr. Ripley. I read Patricia Highsmith and I read Carol, and I really quite liked this book, and it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, because Todd Haynes did such a good job with the film that I don't think the book, I don't know, what I wanted for a book was then different, I think, from what I got, but she writes very well, and I find it very funny that she also wrote The Talented Mr. Ripley. In my head, these are two different, I can't believe that this is written by the same person, in case you didn't know. I absolutely love this film. It's one of my best friend's absolute favourite films. The series had just come out and I found this second hand, so I was like, oh, why the heck not? £5 second hand, which is, I think, is expensive for a second hand book. I also really like this edition, so I was like, okay, I can be swayed by the picture on the cover. The writing in this is brilliant. The pacing in this is brilliant. The tension, you know, if you think the tension and stuff in the film is good, it's even better in here. I thought this was such a fun and entertaining read, and it is violent and kind of gross. And in the film, is Dickie Greenwood English?
Okay, so I did just go and check this. In the film, he is obviously American. I just think that in my brain, the holiday Jude Law has been like mapped onto Talented Mr. Ripley Jude Law.
But I also could not read this, and I couldn't separate out Matt Damon, Jude Law and Gwyneth Paltrow because they were phenomenally well cast. I do think Gwyneth Paltrow was too pretty. Is she called Margot? It's her goddamn name. Marge. She's not as pretty in the book. She's also kind of annoying in this, but I think that serves her character so incredibly well. And it's also fun because, you know, you keep getting so irritated with Tom Ripley and you're just like, you're going to get caught? You are stupid? And all you can think about is how you would have done his crimes better. It was such a fun read, and I really, there's not an awful lot for me to say other than I think it was very, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say it's atmospheric, but it's very lived in and you can really see and feel the world, and I think there's something so, I wouldn't say visceral, but it just, there's something about the way that she writes, but she puts it right in front of you without feeling like she's doing excessive world building or anything like that, but you're just there. And this may be my own sort of like life experience is filling in a lot of that context. Like, I've been to Rome quite a few times, you know, I've been to the Amalfi Coast. I know these kind of like Italian sort of like sleepy coastal beaches where they in it's not Montesi, it's a made up little town. Mongibello? Yeah, that's right, it's called Mongibello. It's not real. It's not a real town, but it really feels like it just, you know, it may as well be. I do think there's something very playful in the way that she writes in a slightly kind of like sick way because of the actual content of the book. If you like Catch Me If You Can, this will really, really float your boat. It's also fun about, you know, getting away with crimes before digital and the internet. That's also how this feels in, you know, how he commits different kind of fraud and things like that. It is great. As well, if you want to go escape to like 1940s Rome and New York and Venice and stuff, do your own little Euro tour, with a slice of crime, this will really float your boat. Float your, what did I even just say? This will really, really float your boat much more than it did Dickie's, but that's not the point. Yeah, such a solid thing to read, really, really recommend. And then I headed into an absolute slump for just months. I didn't read. I think this was just a point at which I was writing so many cover letters I just didn't want to see any more words. So I just kind of stopped reading for a bit. And then summer rolled around. You say beach, I say read. I finally read the 5th installment, or the 4th, depending on how you want to look at it, of S.J.Mass's series Actor. This was A Court of Silver Flames. It is like 750 pages of pornography. This was great, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I read this astonishingly fast, especially for me over the summer when I was, we went to Sardinia for a week and it was lovely. I just read this the whole time. I thoroughly enjoyed it. This was my previous record of most pages read in a day, which was 175, before I ended up reading Eliza Clark's Penance, which topped me out at 215, which I think is very impressive. But yes, this focuses much more on Nesta's perspective instead of the protagonists from the first 4 books, which are Feyre and, I was gonna say Tamlin, Feyre and Riesland. Riesland? This instead is about Cassian and Nesta. Nesta is the mean, bitter older sister of the protagonist, and Cassian is more he's like the himbo slash warlord of this little set of characters, the inner circle. These books, you just have to know what they are, and you have to love them for what they are, and you have to have low expectations. If what you want is just like some easy beach-ridden smut with like a side of fantasy and whatever crack it is that S.J.Mass puts in the last 200 like pages of her books, because every single time I read like the end of her books, I like inhale them. Like, I don't know, it's every single time. I don't know what she does to them. Like, these are like long chunky books, but like they're really not particularly difficult. But the last 200 pages are always just, you just cannot put them down, which I always find really fascinating. I actually really like this compared to some of the other ones. I still think A Court of Mist and Fury, which is the second one, is excellent. It's trope riddled and there's many issues with it, but it's just fun and enjoyable, okay? This I thought was a bit more interesting, a little bit more profound is not the word, but it has a bit more depth to the characters. It's also fun that it doesn't sort of focus on the rest of this like group of characters, and it focuses really more just on Nesta and Cassian's relationship. And because Nesta she starts off as a bad character. Like, in the first few books, she is fundamentally dislikable. She has many flaws. She is mean, she is cruel, she is bitter, which makes her a really good starting point for a redemption arc. What I like about her and the changes that she makes is that, you know, compared to what happens in really the first books, is that Feyre, you know, does her thing. She gets a little training montage. She's 18 and magically incredibly talented at everything, apart from maybe painting. My favourite actor like theory is that Feyre's really shit at painting, and I love it so much. It makes everything so much more entertaining. But because Nesta is older, she has been through more stuff. She has already sort of got a character that has been slowly developing, that when you get to her book, I just thought it was a lot more fun because of that. and she was more of an interesting character. She goes through bad things, she pulls herself through. There is a reason of why she's just such a fucking bitch in the other books, and that is explored and like discussed, and like, yes, it could be better, it could be more deep, but look, I was lying on a beach. There was only so much depth that I was ever going to want from these books, you know, but I do think that this one delivers a little bit more substance to the characters than the previous books do. The world building in this is just continuously subpar. It's not why you're reading these books. This is through and through romantasy. You really should not have any higher expectations about it from that. They fuck a lot in this book. They, like, if that's, you know, if that's what you want from it, they shag a lot in this book. That's like the main content of this book, but also a little bit more focus on Nessa's friendships and sisterhood and like healing and like mental health and going through bad traumatic things and coming out the other end of it. So I recommend. You do have to read this in context with the other books, but I think for the most recent installment of that series, I thought it was good. This is my second favourite one. So Court of Mist and Fury, then this one, then A Court of Wings and Ruin, then the original, then the like little fluffy winter edition. I'd had this for a few years. One of my friends really didn't understand why I'd read through the first 4 like lightning, like I just went straight through them and then would not read this. But it's because I was always the kid who, if it was something really fun to eat on my plate, I would eat it last. I could not bear the idea of reading this not knowing when the next edition was going to come out. So when the book was meant to be told from Elaine's perspective will come out, apparently. S.J.Mass has confirmed that that book is now coming, so I felt like I could read this. If you were interested, it's the reason why I have never, and probably will never, read Game of Thrones. If George R.R. Martin isn't gonna finish it, I don't want to read it. I can't do that to myself. To leave things unfinished, it would make my brain like just very upset. So because she confirmed the new book, I was able to finally read this one. Yeah, I enjoyed this. I like shamelessly enjoy these books, and they got me really back into reading fantasy. You can catch my, I'm not sure which side it is, the fancy haul that I did recently. So, you know, love or hate this series, love or hate S.J.Mass, she has got me back into fantasy and into the good stuff as well. So at the very least for that, I can be very, very grateful. Yeah. Okie dokie. The next thing that I read then over the summer was Chelsea G. Summers' A Certain Hunger. First of all, I fucking hate this cover. The other cover of this book is this the American cover? This is incredible. Why the hell do I have this? This is, had I not seen that other cover, I would not have just bought this. This is so shit. This book is fucking fantastic. I thought this was absolutely excellent. This was just incredible. Everything about this book was just so up my street. Is that what I want to say about this? This book is a kind of gross and graphic, I say kind of, this is a gross and graphic description of a woman who murders her various lovers and eats part of them. She eats them. She's a food critic who's also a cannibal. It is exactly as disgusting as it sounds, but the way that Chelsea G. Summers renders this awful, terrible, bitchy woman who you cannot help but really like and also totally agree with all of her opinions about murdering men and then eating them. It's more that like she eats like liver at one point, and I'm just like not down with that regardless of like what kind of animal it comes from. I think it's just a bit... One of the notes I wrote in the front for myself was girl dinner. Girl dinner. This really is written absolutely phenomenally. Chelsea G. Summers, from what I understand, is this her first novel? I think this is her first novel, but she has written in magazines and been in publishing for quite a while beforehand. So there's quite a lot that you can sort of, I think, the main character is called Dorothy Daniels, she's a food critic, so I think there's a lot that you can sort of transpose from maybe Chelsea G. Summers onto Dorothy Daniels. Maybe not in character, that's quite a thing to say, but more that she really writes from a perspective of understanding sort of how this publishing landscape has changed, especially over the last 20-30 years, because Dorothy Daniels as a character starts out writing for these, you know, food magazines that all have more money than sense, and then how she struggles to adapt to a world that becomes more online and also more democratic, because now everybody can be a critic. Look at me, I'm giving you my opinions on books. I could call myself a book critic and be done for the day, you know. It's kind of, the internet has democratized a lot of these things, which means that now we'll listen to anybody's opinion. And Dorothy Daniels as a character fundamentally disagrees with that. She knows things about food and you don't, which is, you know, as she's got more bored of everything else, you can understand why she's like, she's gonna cook and eat people. Men. She cooks and eats men. This was a wild ride. And one of the things I wrote in the front was, I felt like she didn't put a word wrong for 300 pages. What a read. This, I think, is something I would say could become a modern classic, could become a future classic. I fundamentally and thoroughly believe that. There was one point where she is describing shrimp. She's describing how you eat shrimp and the difference between American and Mediterranean shrimp. And I got 2/3 of the way through this paragraph before I realised, I annotate my books, before I realised what it was that I was annotating. Because her writing is it's so vivid, it's so full of life and death, and it is just incredibly poignant and sharp. And she, you know, she's so descriptive without being annoying with adjectives, because some people really can get annoying with adjectives because that's what they think descriptive writing is. And I just think she uses all of your senses to really conjure these very, very vivid and lived in experiences, which is kind of rather not live in. The way that she writes and also sort of the way that these stories about these men sort of slot in together, I think it's wonderfully, wonderfully crafted, so well written, and such a fantastically cohesive piece of work that my mother, I'm going to the opera with my mother, she's texting me things. This is a fantastic novel, and it will not be for everyone. I kind of wanted it to go, I wanted to go around recommending it to all of my friends, and like trying to get my boyfriend to read it, but at the same time, he's very squeamish, so he would not do well reading this. Many of you would probably not enjoy this, but the ones who will, really, really will enjoy this. I think this is a love or hate sort of thing, and yeah, incredibly vibrant and incredibly vivid, and so worth its 300 pages. It's great and I loved it, and I wonder and worry about what that says about me, but this was phenomenally well written. And if you have a love for Italy and for food, you'll really get a kick out of this. As I said, my mum booked last minute tickets to the opera. We're going to see Aida tonight, so I now need to get opera ready-ish, so I'll see you later for the next half of this. And by seeing you later, I mean you'll see me immediately. I'll see you guys later. Okay, in a bit.
Hello, yes, it's editing Emma. I'm so sorry. When I filmed this, I was genuinely convinced I would sit down the next day, film the rest of it, and put it together to have one video. This video's already ended up being fairly long, so I'm not going to do that anymore. I do apologise, there will be a part 2 now. But, oh no, more videos? Oh, how terrible. Oh, how awful. Thank you for bearing with me. The opera was really good, by the way. We went to see Aida at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden in London, and I really recommend if you get a chance to see it. I think the best place to see it is going to be in Verona. They have like a massive amphitheatre. They do like a very like classical rendition of it. Aida did like a tragic love story of an Ethiopian princess who gets captured by the Egyptians and becomes a slave. She falls in love with somebody she's not supposed to be in love with, and then like the tragedy that ensues, because it's Verdi, so like tragedy. Yeah, we saw it and it was always really good. The way they adapt it at the Royal Opera House is into like a sort of 20th century military dictatorship state kind of thing. Really recommend. The traditional setting is like classical Egyptian, which I really want to go see because that'd be really cool. But yes, so sorry about splitting up. I didn't want to do it, but it's happened anyway. So thank you very much for bearing with me. Like, subscribe and all that jazz, and I will see you very, very soon.